The road gave up 20 miles back, turning into a scar of red mud that climbed between black pines until even the crows stopped following. What was left of the trail ended at a gate made of rusted bed springs and deer bones, swaying in wind that smelled like wet coal and something sweeter underneath, something that had been left too long in a jar. The storm came down the ridge like it had been saving itself for years. One minute the sky was the color of dirty tin, the next it split open and the world turned to water. I'd been walking the old logging road that wasn't on any map anymore, chasing rumors of a family so far back in the hills they'd forgotten the century, when the clouds dropped and the temperature fell 20 degrees in a breath. Pines bent double. The trail turned into a creek of red slurry that sucked at my boots and tried to keep them. I'd heard the stories in the last gas station before the national forest, whispers about the Whittakers up in Odd, how they didn't come down for welfare checks, how the census takers gave up after one went missing in '89, how preachers who tried to bring the word got chased off with rock salt and worse. The old man pumping diesel just laughed through the holes where his teeth used to be and said, "Ain't no road goes all the way to hell, son. It just gets narrower." But I had a camera and a grant and the kind of arrogance that comes from never having been truly scared. So I kept walking. By late afternoon the light had gone sick and green. I smelled the chimney smoke before I saw the hollow, thin, sour, like burning hair. Then the trail spat me out above a bowl of land where the mountains folded in on themselves and refused to let anything leave. The Whittaker place sat at the bottom like a scab. 3 shacks, a chicken house falling sideways, rusted hulks of cars half swallowed by kudzu. A creek ran black through the middle, carrying things downstream I didn't want to look at too closely. The rain turned mean. It came in sheets that stung like buckshot. My pack weighed 50 pounds of wet and my fingers had gone numb around the camera strap. I remember thinking, very clearly, that if I turned around right then I could still make it to the Forest Service road before dark. Instead I started down the switchback path, sliding on my ass half the time, because some part of me needed to see if the stories were worse than imagination. Halfway down, the dog found me. It came out of the laurel thicket without a sound, just a shape the color of old motor oil, ribs showing, eyes milked over with cataracts. It didn't bark. It only stared, head lowered, and I knew if I took another step it would take my throat out without changing expression. We stood there while the rain hammered us both, water running pink where it washed the mud from my scraped palms. Then a voice floated down from the porch, high and childish and wrong coming from a grown man's body. "Let him come, Betty. Storm's bad enough to drown a preacher." The dog turned and trotted back toward the shacks like it had been waiting for permission. I followed because the alternative was staying on the hillside and becoming part of the mountain's collection. The yard was ankle-deep soup. Chickens floated by like they'd given up. Every window glowed with lantern light the color of infected teeth. Figures moved behind the newspaper panes, too many for 3 small buildings. As I got closer I saw them properly for the first time. They were all sizes but the same face, repeated with small cruel variations. Cheekbones too sharp or not sharp enough. Noses flattened or hooked like talons. Mouths that didn't close right. Some had the family eyes, pale gray ringed with red, while others had pupils so blown they looked black. A woman with a chin that tapered to a soft point sat on an overturned bucket rocking an invisible baby. A boy no older than 12 stood beside her with an erection tenting his filthy overalls, staring at me like I was food. The man with the childish voice stepped off the porch. He was tall, 6'4" at least, but moved like his joints had been assembled wrong. His beard grew in uneven patches and his Adam's apple bobbed like it was trying to escape. He carried the shotgun loose in one hand, more walking stick than weapon. "Name's Timmy," he said, grinning with teeth the color of creek stones. "But they all call me Brother Timmy even though I ain't nobody's brother no more." He laughed like that was the funniest thing anyone had ever said. Behind him the others gathered, spilling out of doorways, pressing against windows. I counted 17, 18, lost track. Some waved. Some just breathed on the glass and drew circles in the fog. A girl with no chin and beautiful long black hair held up a mason jar full of something floating and smiled at me with her whole face. Lightning hit the ridge above us and the thunder came so close I felt it in my teeth. The rain intensified, drumming on the tin roofs like it wanted inside. Brother Timmy tilted his head, listening to something I couldn't hear. "Granny says you can stay till the water goes down," he announced. "Says the mountain brung you for a reason." He turned and started walking toward the biggest shack. The dog fell in beside him. The rest of the family parted just enough to let me through, their smell hitting me all at once, unwashed bodies, sour milk, something coppery under it all. I stepped onto the porch and the door opened before I touched it. Inside was warm inside, hotter than it had any right to be, and dark except for the fire and the lanterns. Faces turned toward me, dozens of them, all waiting. And from somewhere deeper in the house, underneath the crackle of burning pine and the drumming rain, I heard it, a small muffled thump, like a heartbeat trying to punch its way out of a box. The first night I slept in the room they called the front room, on a mattress that smelled like wet dog and something sweeter, like spoiled peaches. They gave me a quilt stitched from feed sacks and funeral dresses, and every time I moved it released a puff of dust that glittered in the lantern light like tiny bones. The house never went quiet. Floorboards creaked under bare feet that weren't mine, whispers that rose and fell like wind through a cracked flue, and underneath everything that soft, steady thump that had followed me inside from the storm. Morning came gray and dripping. The rain had settled into a steady hiss that made the hollow feel sealed under glass. I woke to find a circle of children staring at me from the doorway, their eyes too large, their mouths open just enough to show the pink roofs. When I sat up they scattered like roaches, giggling in voices that overlapped and canceled each other out. Brother Timmy brought me a tin cup of coffee that tasted of rust and chicory. He watched me drink it the way a cat watches a bird with a broken wing. "You sleep good?" he asked. I lied and said yes. He nodded as if I'd told the truth. "Granny wants to see you after while. Says the mountain kept you for a purpose." I asked where the bathroom was. He pointed out back, toward a leaning outhouse whose door hung by one leather hinge. I took my camera bag with me, telling myself it was to keep it dry. The yard was a lake of mud. Chickens stood on the hoods of dead cars, necks tucked against the rain. I passed the woodpile where I'd seen the burlap moving the night before. Today it was just a pile of wet burlap, but the ground around it had been smoothed flat, as though someone had taken a broom to footprints. Inside the outhouse the smell was so thick it had weight. While I squatted over the hole something scratched on the boards behind me, slow and deliberate, like fingernails counting. I jerked around so fast I nearly fell in. Nothing there but splinters and spiderwebs fat with old flies. But the scratching moved, traveling around the walls until it was coming from beneath the seat. I got out of there with my pants half buttoned and my heart slamming against my ribs. When I came back, the children were lined up on the porch again, but this time they held hands in a crooked row. The girl with no chin and the long black hair stepped forward. She couldn't have been more than 14, but her belly swelled under a man's thermal shirt like she'd swallowed a pumpkin whole. She held out a mason jar. Inside floated a tiny pink hand, fingers curled, no bigger than a hummingbird. The lid was sealed with wax and a strip of red cloth. "For the baby," she whispered, voice hoarse, like she'd screamed herself raw years ago and never quite healed. "So it knows the way home." I backed away. She followed one step, two, then Brother Timmy was there, taking the jar gently from her fingers. "Now, Laureen," he scolded, soft as a lullaby. "Stranger ain't ready for gifts yet." He tucked the jar inside his coat and steered me toward the middle shack. "Granny's waiting." The old woman sat in a rocking chair that had lost its rock, bolted to the floor so it only creaked. Her face was a road map of wrinkles folded over one another until the original shape was lost. One eye was milky, the other sharp as a briar. She smelled of camphor and urine and something metallic. She studied me for a long time without speaking. Then she lifted a hand like a claw and pointed at my chest. "You hear her," she said. Not a statement, not a question. I started to deny it, but the thump came again, louder now that the rain had eased to a whisper. It was directly beneath us, under the floorboards, steady as a second heart. Granny smiled. Her teeth were black nubs worn to points. "Raylene," she croaked. "Born wrong. Tongue too big, eyes on the sides like a deer." Lord marked her for his own, but she won't go quiet. She leaned forward until I smelled the rot in her lungs. Tonight we send her back clean. Before moonrise. Before she damns us all again. Brother Timmy laid a hand on my shoulder, fingers pressing just hard enough to remind me how far I was from any road. You'll want to pray with us, he said. Family don't like strangers watching the burying. But Granny says you was brung to carry the box. Somewhere beneath our feet the thump paused, as if listening, then came back faster, desperate, the sound of small fists beating on pine from the inside. The afternoon dragged itself across the hollow like a wounded thing. The rain quit but the clouds stayed low, pressing the rooftops until the chimneys almost touched the sky. I kept waiting for a moment to slip away, to shoulder my pack and run until my lungs burst, but there was always someone watching. A child with a head too large for its neck sat on the porch rail picking scabs. An old man who might have been 30 followed me when I went for water, humming the same 3 notes over and over until they felt drilled into my skull. Even the dog never slept. It lay in the yard with its blind eyes fixed on me, pink tongue lolling like it already tasted what was left. I tried the satellite phone twice. No signal, not even an emergency tone. Just a soft electronic sigh, as if the mountains themselves were exhaling disappointment. Eventually Brother Timmy led me to the back room of the smallest shack, the one with the padlock on the outside. He took the key from around his neck, slow, ceremonial, and swung the door inward. The smell that rolled out was wet earth and baby powder gone bad. Family pictures, he said. Granny wants you to understand why we do what we do. The room had no windows. A single kerosene lamp burned on a crate, throwing shadows that crawled up walls papered with calendars from decades I'd never lived in. Every surface was crowded with photographs in frames made of popsicle sticks and animal bone. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Faces repeated down through the years like a deck of cards shuffled by a drunk. I saw the same man in a doughboy helmet from 1918 and again in overalls beside a Model T, then older, holding a baby with the same helmet perched on its tiny head. A woman with a hairlip posed in a confirmation dress in 1932, then in the same dress 20 years later, belly swollen, standing beside a boy who had her same split mouth. Twins born in 1956 who looked 40 at 10. A wedding portrait of a bride and groom who shared one continuous eyebrow. Polaroids from the 70s showed children with foreheads that sloped straight back into their skulls, grinning beside Christmas trees decorated with tinsel and raccoon tails. And everywhere the same last name scratched on the back in pencil that had faded to brown: Whittaker, Whittaker, Whittaker. Brother Timmy moved behind me, close enough that his breath stirred the hair at my temple. Started with great-grandpa Ezra and his sister Ruth Ann, he whispered, pride thick in his throat. They was promised to outsiders, but the Lord sent floods that washed the roads away for 7 years. When the water went down, the outsiders was gone and Ezra said the Lord meant for us to stay pure. Said mixing blood was the original sin, not the keeping of it. He lifted a tintype of 2 children no older than 12, naked except for Sunday shoes, arms around each other's waists. Their faces were beautiful in the way knives are beautiful. Every generation since tried to run, he continued. Some made it to the county road and got sent back by troopers who didn't know better. Some got dragged back by cousins waiting in the Laurel. One girl in 63 cut her own feet off with a hatchet so she couldn't walk down the mountain. We buried what was left of her up yonder with the others. He pointed to a shelf where mason jars stood in neat rows. Inside each floated something small and curled, tiny spines, translucent hands, things that had never drawn breath. Ones that come out too wrong to live, he said softly. Or too right to let the world see. We give 'em back to the dirt before they can cry. That's mercy. I backed away until my shoulders hit the wall. The lamp flame guttered and every face in every photograph seemed to lean forward at once. Brother Timmy's hand found my wrist. His fingers were hot and damp. Raylene's the worst yet, he said. Me and Lorene's. Born on the black moon. Tongue split like a snake's, eyes on the sides of her head. She won't eat, won't close her fists. Just stares and thumps. Granny says the old sin's finally used itself up in her. Says burying her living is the only way to break the chain. He released me and picked up a yellowed newspaper clipping pinned beneath a rusted railroad spike. The headline read, "ODD toddler found wandering RT, 52, returned to family." The grainy photo showed a naked child with limbs too long, being led away by a deputy whose face had been scratched out with a nail. That was Raylene's brother Timmy said. 2 years ago. We got him back before they could poke him full of needles. Buried him clean, same as we'll do her tonight. His eyes shone with something that might have been tears or fever. Mountain keeps its own, he whispered. Always has. From the main house came the sound of a hymn starting up, voices overlapping in keys that grated against each other like rusted hinges. The lamp flame straightened, burning suddenly blue, and every photograph on the walls seemed to smile with the same broken mouth. The hymn died away around dusk, leaving only the drip of water from the eaves and the low muttering of the family as they moved through the house like smoke. I stood in the doorway of the photograph room, afraid to step back into the narrow hallway where hands could reach from any shadow. Brother Timmy had left me there with the lamp turned low, saying, "Wait on the Lord's time," and I had waited, counting heartbeats, until the house itself seemed to breathe around me. Then the padlock clicked again and Laureen appeared, barefoot, belly leading the way. She carried a coal oil lantern that painted her face orange and hollow. Without a word she took my sleeve and pulled. Her grip was stronger than it had any right to be. "Come see her before they take her," she rasped. "She knows you're here." I let her lead me through a maze of leaning walls and rooms that smelled of sour milk and camphor. We passed doorways where bodies lay tangled on pallets, limbs indistinguishable, breathing in the same slow rhythm. No one looked up. At the back of the house Laureen pushed aside a quilt that served as a door and we stepped down 3 dirt steps into a root cellar that had never been meant for storage of anything human. The air down there was colder, wetter, like stepping into a grave already dug. The lantern showed rough shelves of clouded jars, rusted cans, a shovel leaning in the corner with fresh clay on the blade. And in the center of the floor, a trapdoor made of thick pine planks, new wood, pale as bone. A hasp and padlock gleamed new. Laureen knelt, joints cracking, and worked the lock with a key she wore between her breasts on a rawhide cord. The hasp squealed open. She lifted the door and the smell that rose out was of milk gone bad and terror so pure it had weight. I saw the hole first, 6 feet long, 2 feet wide, dug straight into the red clay floor of the cellar. At the bottom lay a pine box no bigger than a suitcase, lid already nailed shut except for a single knothole the size of a nickel. Someone had bored air holes along the sides with a dozen tiny mouths breathing. Then I saw Raylene. She was wedged between the box and the wall of the hole, small enough that they'd had to fold her to make her fit. Her skin was the color of tallow, mottled blue at the knees and elbows. The eyes were set too far apart, almost on the sides of her skull bulged huge and black, reflecting the lantern like whetstones. Her mouth forced open by a rag knotted so tight the corners had cut grooves into her cheeks. Thin wrists bound behind her with baling twine that had already drawn blood. When the light hit her she jerked, a convulsion that rattled the box lid against its nails, and from inside came that same thump, frantic now, the sound of a bird beating itself to death against glass. Laureen lowered the lantern until flames almost touched the child's face. "She won't stop looking at me," she whispered. "Even when I sleep she's looking." Raylene's chest hitched. A thin whine leaked around the gag, rising into something that wasn't human and wasn't animal either. Her legs, too short, too bent, kicked uselessly, smearing the clay with bloody prints where the skin had split. I dropped to my knees at the edge of the hole. My shadow fell across her and for one heartbeat she stilled, those terrible eyes fixing on mine with a clarity that punched the air from my lungs. She knew exactly what was coming. She had always known. Laureen reached past me and stroked the child's matted hair with the tenderness of a mother calming a fever. "Granny says after tonight the dreams will quit," she said. "Says the mountain will be quiet again." From upstairs came the scrape of chairs, the shuffle of many feet, the low excited murmur of people gathering for a wedding or a hanging. Lanterns began moving past the quilt door, shadows stretching long and thin. Laureen stood. She set the lantern on a shelf so the light fell full into the hole, turning Raylene's eyes into coins of fire. "They're coming with the dirt," she said, and her voice cracked like thin ice. "You can help lower the box or you can stand aside. Either way, she goes in before the moon." She climbed the steps. The quilt fell back into place, cutting off most of the sound from above, but not all. I heard Brother Timmy's childish tenor giving instructions, the clink of shovels, someone laughing in a register that slid up and down the scale like a broken flute. Raylene never blinked. The knothole in the coffin lid was directly in front of her face now. I could see her breath fogging the wood in quick, frantic puffs. Her bound hands opened and closed, fingers curling toward me, begging without words. Boots began descending the steps, slow and heavy, bringing the smell of wet earth and coal oil and something sweet and rotting underneath it all. The procession came down the steps single file, lanterns swinging low so the light crawled over the walls like fat yellow spiders. First Granny, carried in Brother Timmy's arms because her legs had quit years ago, her head lolling against his chest yet that one sharp eye still fixed on the hole. Then the others, Laureen with her swollen belly leading, the children, the half-grown men and women who shared the same soft jaw, the same wandering stare. They moved without speaking, the way people do when the thing they're about to do has been rehearsed in dreams for generations. Someone had already placed the coffin lid back on the pine box. The nails were started but not driven home, they stuck up like crooked teeth. Raylene's muffled keening leaked through the knothole, thin and high, the sound a rabbit makes when the trap snaps. Every lantern flame dipped toward it, as though the child were pulling the fire to her. They formed a loose circle around the hole. Hands reached out, not to help, only to touch one another, shoulder to shoulder, wrist to wrist, a living chain of the same blood repeating itself until the beginning and the end blurred. Brother Timmy set Granny on a crate at the head of the grave. She raised one claw and the room went still except for the rain starting again on the tin roof far above, a slow, patient drumming. "Behold," she croaked, "the vessel is cracked. The blood has turned on itself. Tonight we pour it back into the way it came." A murmur rippled through them, half prayer, half moan. Someone began humming the same 3 notes I'd heard all day, and the rest took it up until the cellar vibrated like a hive. 2 of the bigger men, boys really, though their faces were old, knelt and gripped the ropes looped under the box. On some unspoken count they lifted. The coffin came up dripping clay, lighter than it should have been, rocking gently as Raylene thrashed inside. When it cleared the edge they set it on the dirt floor between Granny's crate and me. The knothole faced the old woman now. I saw her pupil contract to a pin in the lantern light as she stared into whatever was staring back. Laureen stepped forward with a mason jar full of creek water and something darker floating in it. She unscrewed the lid and poured the contents over the box in a slow circle. Where it touched, the pine darkened like it was drinking. "For the cleansing," she whispered. The humming rose. Hands reached for the hammers lying ready on a shelf, claw hammers, ball peen, a sledge with a cracked handle. Metal glinted. Nails waited in cupped palms like communion wafers. I felt the moment stretch, thin and bright as hot wire. My legs had gone numb from kneeling, but the rest of me was on fire. I could smell the sweat of the circle, the sour milk smell of fear, the copper promise of what came next. 20 faces, maybe 30, all turned toward the box, all waiting for the first blow that would seal it forever. Raylene screamed then, or tried to. The rag turned it into a wet gurgle, but the box lid jumped under the force of it, nails squealing in their holes. One of the children laughed, a high broken sound, and several others joined in until the cellar rang with a sound I hope never to hear again. Brother Timmy looked at me. His eyes were gentle, almost apologetic. "Hold her steady, stranger," he said, offering me the sledge. "Mountain likes a willing hand." The hammer weighed 1,000 pounds and nothing at all. Around me the family pressed closer, their breath hot on my neck, their fingers brushing my sleeves like moths. The lanterns lowered until the light pooled only in the hole and on the box, leaving the faces in darkness so all I could see were eyes shining wet. Inside the pine, Raylene's thrashing slowed. Not from acceptance, from exhaustion. The knothole fogged again, slower now, each breath a small surrender. I could hear her fingernails scraping wood, a sound softer than the rain, almost tender. Granny leaned forward until her lips nearly touched the box. "Time," she said. The humming stopped so suddenly my pulse filled the silence like a drum. Every hammer rose a fraction. The ropes creaked as the men prepared to lower the coffin back into the earth. I felt the mountain leaning in, patient, ancient, hungry, waiting to see whether the outsider would finally choose a side.